Staying with us here on SABC News, you're watching SA Today with me, Flo Latwaba. After nearly 2 weeks of talks, the almost 200 countries represented at the COP26 remain at odds over a range of issues, from how rich nations should compensate poor ones for damage caused by climate-driven disasters to how often nations should be required to update their emissions pledges. A new draft document published on Friday morning weakened the language used in previous texts to address the phasing out of fossil fuels. The conference set out with the core aim to keep alive the 2015 Paris Agreement's aspirational target to cap global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Right, for more now, we cross to our correspondent, Laura Makin-Isherwood, who is in London for us. A very good afternoon to you, Laura. Yesterday when we spoke about the US and the Chinese joint input on tackling climate change being two of the largest emitters of CO2. What's on the agenda today, and what are the different declarations or even perhaps contributions to the issue of climate change that are being made?
Well, today is all about trying to find that final consensus around this repeated draft document that has been published early this morning. The plans had been for the gavel to fall finally on the scheduled talks in just over 4.5 hours' time, but it seems like this is a real race to get to any kind of agreement now, because we hear that actually these talks might go on beyond that. It could be that they go overnight, perhaps into tomorrow. Advisors and negotiators aren't really sure, and that's because there are plenty of deviations in terms of what each country wants from this agreement. And of course, the ambition had been at COP for enough pledges to be made and enough commitments to be made for global temperatures to rise to about 1.5 degrees by the end of this century compared to pre-industrial levels. But even with the commitments made so far, even with that agreement between China and the US, it seems like we are on track to moving towards more the 1.8 to 2.4 degree marks. There's a massive discrepancy there in what different modelling scenarios are suggesting. So now it's all about trying to come to some kind of consensus between those near 200 countries now, where there will be some sort of progress made here on commitments on trying to reduce fossil fuel use, on trying to reduce the use of coal in coal-powered fire stations. But it's definitely not the strength that at least the UK presidency team here were hoping for. And there are plenty, including the UN's Secretary General Antonio Guterres, just thinking that this 1.5 degree goal just simply isn't possible now.
At the risk of this just being, another talk shop where leaders come together and make certain concessions and plans, one needs to know where exactly they plan to begin. When we wrap up, and I believe that the conference does indeed enter its final day, after we wrap up, after it's all said and done, do we have any clarity as to where exactly we begin at this point? We heard what the US and China had to say yesterday, but in terms of all those who are present, where are we actually going to start? Where does it all begin in essence?
Well, a lot of this is down to individual governments, individual nations taking on board what has been said here in Glasgow, taking on board these commitments that other countries perhaps have made and following through with them, because a lot of the issue here is that any promises are not essentially legally binding. This is an agreement, an ambition, and unless individual governments, individual leaders really grasp hold of that and force through policies domestically in their own countries, there's not really anyone policing it at all. It's all about peer pressure, about different nations doing more than others, encouraging collaboration, bilateral talks, and it's more diplomacy perhaps than actually just coming out here and saying, I commit to cutting methane by 30% by 2030. It's all about actually what happens in the years to come, and we know that there has been an arrangement now for nations to come back every year and reaffirm those commitments, talk about what they're planning to do, and also give an update as well as to how their countries are faring. And I think without that, and without that continuous kind of keeping track of what nations are doing, it's very difficult to ensure that any of the promises, pledges, the talk that has been made here and the sort of pleas from those nations that are facing the impacts of climate change most heavily, it's really hard to tell whether any of this will actually take hold for years to come. So this yearly arrangement coming back around the table is going to be really important in monitoring that.
All right, Laura, thank you so very much for speaking to us this afternoon, and we'll certainly be catching up with you later on to hear more of how indeed this has all wrapped up. Thank you very much, Laura.